Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh. This week marks 20 years since the United States of America, under the then President George W. Bush, had invaded into Iraq. There is no such thing as a just war. There's no such thing as a war that leads to a better life. Every war is driven by greed, to grab territory, to grab a geostrategic advantage. But there have been few wars in history that have been driven by a pile of lies, such as the invasion of Iraq. So what did the United States of America achieve by invading into Iraq? More than 1 million Iraqis got killed. Saddam Hussein's departure created a power vacuum, which gave birth to the ISIS. And 2 decades on, the scars of the Iraq war are still raw in the region. And the irony is that even George W. Bush, in a Freudian slip, admitted that the invasion of Iraq was a wholly unjustified and a brutal invasion.
Mr. Bush, when are you going to apologize for the 1 million Iraqis that are dead because you lied? You lied about weapons of mass destruction. You lied about connections to 9/11. You lied about Iraq being a threat. You sent me to Iraq. You sent me to Iraq in 2003. My friends are dead. Joshua Castile. You killed people. You lied. You lied about WMDs. 1 million Iraqis are dead because you lied. My friends are dead because you lied. You need to apologize. Apologize.
This man is Mike Prisoner. He was one of the soldiers who was sent into the Iraq war by George W. Bush, and he confronted his former president at a convention in Los Angeles in 2021. On the 19th of March 2003, exactly 20 years ago, the United States began the invasion of Iraq with its shock and awe tactics. George Bush, who later admitted that his invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq were directed by God, was categorical in his threats.
All the decades of deceit and cruelty have now reached an end. Saddam Hussein and his sons must leave Iraq within 48 hours. Their refusal to do so will result in military conflict, commenced at a time of our choosing.
The American aim in the invasion of Iraq was regime change. And to this effect, the United States accused Iraq under Saddam Hussein of developing and hoarding weapons of mass destruction. Not everyone believed this American spiel. Thousands across different capitals in the world hit the streets to stop the mindless war. And as American bombs rained down from the sky, and the imposing statue of Saddam Hussein was brought down in central Baghdad, it became abundantly clear that George Bush's administration had lied through its teeth. 150,000 American troops, along with 40,000 British troops, had been sent in to fight in this brutal war that was based on a fabrication. Within 3 weeks, by the 9th of April, the Americans declared victory.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
But the bloodletting in Iraq had just begun. Pro-Saddam factions began an insurgency against American forces. The power vacuum resulted in lawlessness. By 2004, the insurgency by the Sunni factions had intensified in Fallujah, while the followers of the Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr consolidated their stranglehold in the south. Images of horrific abuse of detainees at the hands of American soldiers emerged from the Abu Ghraib prison, drawing international condemnation. Iraqi novelist Sinan Anton has a very pertinent question.
Especially Americans and those who supported the war should think, when in history did missiles and bombings bring democracy? Was there a precedent for that?
By 2011, over 500,000 Iraqi people had been killed. But the worst was yet to come. A bitter Sunni-Shiite civil war and a power vacuum in Baghdad created the conditions for the rise of the ISIS. And though the ISIS was eventually defeated, the vicious cycle of violence unleashed by George Bush's war continues to reverberate 2 decades after the lies were sold as a premise for an invasion.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, too. Anyway.
Depleted uranium shells. You heard that right. Armor-piercing shells made out of depleted uranium is what the United Kingdom has offered to send to the battlefields of Ukraine. When Annabel Goldie, the Minister of State for Defence of the United Kingdom, made this statement, it knocked everyone's breath out. So what are depleted uranium shells? Is the use of this type of weapons even legal? Now, where have they been used in the past? From the very outset of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, analysts have been talking about the possibility of this war turning into a nuclear conflict. Because make no mistake about this, once these depleted uranium shells are used in the battlefield, and Russia also responds ferociously with its own depleted uranium weapons, this war would have crossed the point of no return. Our next report gets you the details.
More than 100,000 soldiers have been killed on either side. Over 8.1 million Ukrainians have been uprooted from their homes and now live as refugees scattered in different parts of Europe. Despite this scale of human suffering, the possibility of a ceasefire to end this horrific bloodletting is not even remotely visible on the horizon. And now there is a new type of weapon that is all set to make its entry into the battlefields of Ukraine: depleted uranium. If the name depleted uranium made your heart skip a beat, then it should. First developed by the United States and the United Kingdom in the 1970s, depleted uranium is a byproduct that is obtained during the process of uranium enrichment. It is mildly radioactive. It has been linked to birth defects. It can chemically contaminate the soil. It can cause skin irritation, lead to kidney failure, and can result in skin cancer in people who are exposed to it. Depleted uranium was first used by the Americans on Iraq in the Gulf War in 1991. The Iraqi city of Nasiriyah was bombed in 1991 and again in 2003. Numerous infants born here to parents who have lived continuously in Nasiriyah are said to have been born with congenital defects. Besides Iraq, depleted uranium weapons have been used in Kosovo in 1999. Depleted uranium is 1.7 times denser than lead. Depleted uranium can penetrate straight through a tank's armor and erupt in a burning cloud of vapor. And when the vapor settles, it is poisonous and radioactive. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has hit back at the West. The use of depleted uranium, he says, will end badly for everyone.
This is a step towards further escalation, towards a serious and quantitative escalation. There were statements of some Western representatives saying that there was nothing scary about it, that the depleted uranium shells were not banned, that they were not breaking any conventions, but everybody remembers what results the use of depleted uranium shells had in Yugoslavia or Iraq, when tens of thousands of civilians and NATO soldiers who used those depleted uranium shells were affected. There was a spike in oncological and other dangerous diseases. The soil was poisoned for decades.
Presently, there is no United Nations convention that bans the use of depleted uranium, even though the United Nations nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, has repeatedly cautioned about the risk of radiation in depleted uranium weapons. The British Ministry of Defence has announced that it will send depleted uranium shells with the 14 Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine. Russia, too, has a stockpile of depleted nuclear weapons. For 13 long months, the Ukraine war has been fought with the most top-notch conventional weapons. But what is now clear is that the fighting in Ukraine is now slipping into dangerous nuclear territory. Over 20% of Ukraine has been reduced to rubble. Food has run out. There is acute scarcity of drinking water. Thousands of those who have survived the carnage and have managed to flee to a safer place have brought with them tales of horrific suffering.
I felt the temperature of my body going up so much that I thought I would burn alive. For a fraction of a second, I wished that the concrete slab above falls down on me to stop me from burning alive. This is what was going on through my mind in the fraction of the second after the explosion.
And despite this, the political leaders who are pulling the strings on the battlefield and are turning the screw on the next round of escalation appear to be dragging us down the abyss of a nuclear Armageddon.
Nine Chinese nationals were brutally killed in the Central African Republic at a Chinese-operated gold mine on the outskirts of the capital city of Bangui. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. But there's been a spate of attacks that have targeted Chinese nationals and Chinese interests in the Central African Republic. Now, for over 4 decades, the Central African nation has been in the grip of a vicious cycle of civil wars. So what is behind this unending bloodletting in the troubled Central African nation? Our next report gets you the details.
The attack on the Chimbolo gold mine operated by a Chinese contractor began at 5 a.m. Several gunmen who burst into the premises reportedly overpowered the security guards stationed at the gold mine and opened fire. 9 Chinese nationals were killed and 2 others were grievously wounded.
On March 19, Beijing time, an armed attack took place against a Chinese-funded private enterprise in the Central African Republic. So far, 9 Chinese nationals have been killed and 2 severely injured. General Secretary Xi Jinping attaches great importance to this and has given important instructions, demanding an all-out effort to treat the wounded, handle the aftermath in a timely manner, severely punish perpetrators in accordance with the law, and ensure the safety of Chinese citizens.
As a precautionary measure, Chinese embassy issued an advisory urging its citizens to avoid traveling outside the capital. No militant group has so far claimed responsibility for the attack. Prime Minister Felix Moloa accused the rebel militia, Coalition of Patriots for Change or CPC, of the attack. CPC is an alliance of rebel groups formed before the 2020 presidential elections to oppose the president, Faustin Archange Touadera. The militant group denied responsibility and even condemned the attack. They, in turn, blamed the Russian Wagner mercenary group. But none of the parties, however, have backed their accusation with any evidence. On the 22nd of March, hundreds of people marched in the streets of Bangui in support of China and Russia. One of the world's poorest countries, Central African Republic has been in the throes of civil conflict since 2013. Militias still hold sway over large tracts of the country, and frequent clashes over access to minerals and other resources are reported. The successive cycles of violence displaced more than 500,000 people in the Central African nation. With the recent attack on the Chinese nationals, the security situation remains perilous in the world's second least developed country.
French President Emmanuel Macron is facing the biggest domestic crisis of his second term. Thousands of demonstrators have been rallying against his controversial pension changes. On Thursday, the 9th round of nationwide protests and strikes called by France's 8 main unions paralyzed the country. Bus stations, airports and refineries were all blockaded, leading to chaos and disruptions. Now, thousands of tons of rubbish rot on the Parisian streets as the garbage collectors have refused to report for duty. Macron, however, has remained defiant, arguing that the pension reforms are in the interest of France. Our next report gets you the details.
France has been rocked by a wave of protests against the proposed pension reform bill. On Thursday, thousands of protesters across the French provinces marched in the streets. They held up flags and banners, lit up flares and chanted slogans demanding Emmanuel Macron to roll back the reform. Opinion polls have shown that a majority of voters oppose the delay in the retirement age by 2 years from 62 to 64.
I am on a strike to protest against the pension reform, but mainly also against what is happening in the government with the denial of democracy, which is quite significant right now. They are not listening to the people anymore, and it's important to us to be here so our voice can be heard and to say that what is happening is not normal. If the people are against a reform, they should be heard.
French government claims that the reform is necessary to keep the French economy from slipping into a deficit. Furthermore, the reform will bring France in line with its European neighbours, where the retirement age is higher. Critics, though, insist that the reform is unfair for people in physically challenging jobs and for women who interrupt their careers to have children. Anger escalated on the 16th of March, when the government bypassed a vote in the lower house of parliament. It was an open rebellion by the French public against Emmanuel Macron's legal chicanery to shove an unpopular law down the throats of the French public. Rubbish bins and barricades were set ablaze. The French protesters clashed with the police. Macron's defiant comments in a televised interview on the 22nd of March made matters worse.
There aren't 100 solutions if we want the pension system to be balanced. It no longer is. And the more we wait, the more it will get worse. And so, this reform is necessary. And I say this to the French people, I don't enjoy doing this. I would have preferred not to do this. But it's also because of a sense of responsibility that I expressed my commitment to do this in front of you.
Train stations in the southern city of Nice and Toulouse were blockaded. This was in addition to the rolling strikes that have affected oil depots, public transport, and garbage collection. These strikes, gathering momentum day by day, represent the most serious challenge to Emmanuel Macron's authority since the Yellow Vest revolt 4 years ago. Can Emmanuel Macron stand firm, or will he be forced to listen to the voice of the French masses?
Colombia suspended a ceasefire with the country's biggest drug cartel on the 19th of March. The bilateral ceasefire had been agreed in December last year as part of the Colombian president's plan for total peace. The primary reason behind the suspension is believed to be the harassment and attacks on civilians in the northwestern part of the country. Opposition parties, though, claim that the ceasefire was never bilateral and had been observed only by the government.
Colombian President Gustavo Petro on Sunday suspended a 6-month ceasefire with Colombia's main drug trafficking cartel, Clan del Golfo, or the Gulf Clan. He accused it of sowing anxiety and terror and has ordered the security forces to reactivate all military operations against the criminal gang.
The national government, the President of the Republic, has taken the decision to suspend Decree 2658, the bilateral truce of armed actions, and therefore order the military forces and the national police to carry out operations with all their attacking capacities against the Clan del Golfo.
The suspension of ceasefire is a major blow to President Pedro's attempt to end armed conflict. On the 31st of December last year, President Petro declared a bilateral ceasefire with several armed groups, including the Gulf Clan, National Liberation Army rebels, and the dissidents of the former Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. At the time, it was touted as a significant first step in leftist Petro's total peace plan to end the decades-long armed conflict through negotiations with criminal groups. It was a radical shift from the hardline approach practiced by his conservative predecessor, Iván Duque. But almost immediately, the policy ran into roadblocks, with the Marxist ELN denying that it had ever been party to a deal. In addition to this, FARC dissidents were blamed by the government of numerous violations. The final straw came last week when Petro accusing the Gulf Clan of breaking the ceasefire, blaming it for an attack on an aqueduct and inciting protests from informal gold miners. Criminal groups in Colombia make almost as much money from illegal gold mining as they do from trafficking cocaine. In retaliation to the suspension, there was widespread arson on the streets of Colombia. Dozens of vehicles were torched, allegedly by criminal gang members. The Colombian army claimed to have killed 2 members of the Gulf clan, besides seizing 2 AK-47 rifles, a 40mm grenade launcher, a pistol and ammunition.
The military task force managed to kill alias El Gato and alias Cadena during military operations. The subjects were wearing military clothing and carrying weapons for operational use by the military forces.
Comprised of former right-wing paramilitaries, the Gulf clan controls 30 to 60% of the drugs exported from Colombia. It has a significant presence in many of Colombia's provinces and has forged international connections with other criminal organizations, with whom it collaborates to smuggle drugs from Colombia to the US and as far away as Russia. Illegal gold mining and people smuggling are other chief sources of revenue for the cartel, though the cartel took a beating with the arrest of its chief, Dairo Antonio Usuga, better known as Otoniel, in 2021. But cells of the notorious cartel have continued to operate. Whether the all-out war against the drug cartels will prove effective in the world's largest producer of cocaine at this moment is difficult to predict.
Thanks for watching World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, you can do so by tweeting to me on the Twitter handle that you see on the screens. I'm your host Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.